Thank you, colleagues, for coming today. What I'd like to spend a few minutes with you is reviewing the student teaching weekly assessment and then a little bit later the final assessment. I've not changed any of the content because it's already in our handbook, and with a tweak here and there, the forms will be cleaned up for Mary Lee to duplicate so that we can accomplish this. I'd like to start in order of use, and the first one that we use, obviously, is the weekly assessment. The purpose of this is a frequent assessment of student performance. So this happens at least on a weekly basis that we're trying to get accomplished, depending on where the student teacher is in the phase-in process and the phase-out. And the faculty here understands that, and the cooperating teachers will make sure that they do when they're assigned a student teacher. It's completed by both the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor. So the form for completion that Professor Terry will pass out in this room in a little bit is identical. The only difference is that one's labeled cooperating teacher, the other one's labeled university supervisor. I thought it was real clever in coming up with those titles. Do you approve, sir?
Absolutely.
The procedure for the cooperating teacher, how the person in the field does this, and what we're talking about are the pre-K-12 teachers that we're blessed to have worked with our student teachers in their student teaching experience. First of all, over the years, it seemed like I had to explain this because it is a little bit confusing, and I hope my colleagues would agree. There's options for cooperating teachers on how to complete this weekly assessment form. They can complete it based on one lesson, so they're a third grade cooperating teacher and the student teacher is in that classroom, and it's based on one reading lesson on a given moment in time. Or it could be multiple lessons over a period of a number of days or a week where they write it up. And I think either way is acceptable. I think my colleagues would agree, and the cooperating teacher ought to have that choice. And the third is a combination of single lessons and multiple lessons that the evaluation form, the weekly assessment form is based on. So any of those options or a combination of the first two is a perfectly acceptable way to accomplish it. After the assessment form, the weekly assessment form is completed, then we're always asked, the cooperating teacher, to have a conference with the student teacher to discuss how that lesson went, or how those lessons went, or some combination of those two, so that there's a dialogue. We really think that the real teaching and learning occurs between the discussion of the cooperating teacher and the student teacher. This is a mechanical thing, an administrative thing that I've started, and I hope you would all agree with it. The copy form for the cooperating teacher and the student teacher. So we're asking the cooperating teacher to make a copy of that original document, one for the student teacher and one for themselves, and give the original to the supervisor whenever that's convenient, whenever the student teacher is in your classroom. And I just do that because on occasion we've got to make photocopies of those, and it's just easier and better copy to copy the original. So if you would do that for us, we would appreciate it. Now, for the university supervisor, they're doing the same form, just titled differently. There says university supervisor on it. The form is very similar, and it's based typically on one lesson. Colleagues, would you agree you typically do it based on one lesson instead of a combination of lessons? I put this caveat in here most often because I don't want to limit the university supervisors. Maybe they want to see multiple lessons before they write out a form, but it's been my experience, and I think with my colleagues, that it's typically done based on one lesson because they're not there as much as the cooperating teacher. Once again, we would encourage all university supervisors to have a conference with a student teacher after the form is completed. I personally try to do that on the spot. I try to schedule so I can do that. And over the years, the cooperating teachers have been flexible in adjusting, maybe covering the class for a few minutes when I can do that, because once again, unlike the cooperative teacher, we leave after this lesson, so we would like to have that done as soon as possible. The copying is similar, a copy for the cooperating teacher and a copy for the student teacher, and the university supervisor, if you would keep the original, because eventually that's going to be in a file and potentially photocopied for others to read and see. I've taken a chance here on what I think is the appropriate number for the cooperating teacher. It's never really been established, but I'm going to assume this is reasonable based on the way the colleagues are looking at me. So we're asking that the cooperating teacher do 8 forms over the course of the semester. Now, if it's a split assignment, that would be divided, so 4 each, because the university supervisor is required to do that. And we'll get to that in just a moment. You also have the option, cooperating teachers, that if more is necessary or more is helpful, you're encouraged to do that. But if we had 8 from the field cooperating teacher or teachers, that would make a better picture of how well the student-teacher performed. The categories to write on the form, I've put, it's a summary from the weekly assessment, and I'm just going to try to point out the basics of that. And the basics are that the first thing that you're looking for is, does the student-teacher understand students? And in addition to that, to make it a little clearer, we're talking about learning, development, and respect for diversity in the classroom. So how well do they understand the population and sensitive to the children or the young adults that are in their classroom? How well can they understand and organize subject matter? And I always say to my student teachers, I'm going to assume that you know math, you know science, you know social studies, or whatever content that you're teaching. But in addition to that, can you organize it in such a way that it's coherent for your learners? So we're looking for those things. How well do they plan instruction? Now, when we did our form, we combined some of the Ohio standards for the teaching profession and made it a little more efficient. So under planning, if you look carefully, we're talking about planning for assessment and then also for planning for the delivery of the content. The next thing is how well do they engage and support learning. And this has to do with the delivery of instruction. This has to do with the act of teaching, the performance part of the art form. And finally, creating and maintaining an effective environment, learning environment. And we're talking about classroom management here. So how well do they manage the environment, the materials, and most importantly, the students in that environment. I put this in based on years of experience. I'm asking all our cooperating teachers to make sure that in your mind it's clear what each of the standards on the weekly assessment form is all about. And if you would, please address each of those standards when it appears or does not appear, it should, in a particular lesson on the form and in the correct place. What I mean by that is if the area has to do with planning, don't comment on classroom management there, comment on in the right section. The whole intent of this is to communicate to our future teachers a clear message so that they'll be really strong entry-year teachers. I'd like also to comment on the dialogue between the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor. I think that's critical, that kind of conversation go on throughout the experience for a couple reasons. One, to assure a consistent message for the student teacher. It's never happened to me too much, and I think the reason it doesn't is because there's an ongoing dialogue between the two mentors, one being the cooperating teacher, the other being the university supervisor, so that there's a consistent message, so you're not confusing the student teacher about what strengths and weaknesses are. And probably very consistent with, pardon being redundant, but so that the form is consistent in how it's filled out. It's all about communication. At this time, if Mrs. Terry would give our faculty the forms, they've seen those, and we'll make, obviously, these available to the cooperating teacher faculty in our pre-K to 12 schools. When you get those, our faculty, would you just take a look at them? It's stuff that you have helped develop, and I simply have cleaned them up a little bit, and Mrs. Terry and I have put them in the student-teacher handbook that all the cooperating teachers will have a copy of. Nothing has changed on this form, except to make it a little easier to work with, I think, you know, the spacing and that sort of thing. But the idea is that what I've commented on in the form obviously are two parts to a communication device, one written and the other one oral. Thank you.
Thank you.